Arthur Smith was an aggressive, smart, forward-thinking play caller who was a pivotal reason for the success of the Titans and making them an AFC contender. He was a flashy hire for the Falcons, but it didn't work. He never adapted, and he just couldn't build a sustainable offense in Atlanta despite having a lot of talent. He had 3 first-round picks during his tenure, and he was constantly criticized for misusing them. It didn't help that the Falcons had 4 different starting quarterbacks in 3 years. Things just didn't work out in Atlanta for Arthur Smith, but he did have a lot of success in Tennessee, and we'll see now if he can have success as a coordinator again in Pittsburgh. Arthur Smith had a coaching rise unlike anything we've really ever seen before, and it goes without saying that he had a very fortunate upbringing and situation that makes you wonder if he did fully deserve some of his opportunities. Arthur Smith was undeniably a good coordinator in Tennessee, but how he got there and what he did following the Titans definitely leave some questions. It's well known now, but Arthur Smith's dad, Frederick W. Smith, is the founder of FedEx, and that has led to some interest as to how Arthur got his first NFL job. He was hired to be the defensive quality control coach for the Redskins in 2007, the team that his father was a minority owner of. Nepotism's cool, you always see it in the NFL, although it isn't like Arthur was new to the game. He played offensive line, he was a team captain at Georgetown Prep in North Bethesda, Maryland. Arthur Smith played a bunch of sports. He was best on the football field, and he was a first-team All-State selection before he went to North Carolina. His collegiate career wasn't ideal. He redshirted his first season in 2001, only played in 1 game the following year because of a foot injury. He had a foot surgery, missed the entire 2003 season, and then he didn't have a ton of play time in 2004 or 2005. After graduating, he became a grad assistant at UNC, and 1 year later, he got a job with the Redskins. After Washington, Smith was a defensive intern and administrative assistant at Ole Miss in 2010 before he was hired by the Titans. Smith spent a decade in Tennessee and really did have to grind his way to the top and just slowly work himself to the top of the food chain. It took some time, but he continued to be promoted over and over, and eventually he got his chance to be an NFL head coach. The Falcons hired Arthur Smith to be their new head coach in January 2021. Atlanta was coming off of a terrible 4-12 season where they fired Dan Quinn after 5 games and Raheem Morris became the interim. The Falcons were in a weird spot, only a few seasons removed from a Super Bowl appearance that, they really should have won. After Atlanta blew that 28-3 lead to the Patriots, everything started to fall apart. They still made the playoffs in 2017, and they even won against the Rams in the wild card, but lost in the divisional to the eventual champ Eagles. Atlanta went 7-9 in both 2018 and 2019 before Quinn got canned in 2020. All the while, Arthur Smith was still making a name for himself with the Titans. Somehow, Smith managed to survive 4 different coaching staffs in Tennessee. In 2011, Mike Munchak hired Arthur Smith to be the defensive quality control coach. Then he was the offensive quality control coach the following season before he was promoted to assistant offensive line and assistant tight ends coach in 2013. Munchak was fired after 2013, but Ken Wisenhunt retained Smith as the assistant tight ends coach. Wisenhunt did not last long at all and was replaced by tight ends coach Mike Mularkey. Mularkey made Smith the tight ends coach, and eventually Mularkey was fired, but Mike Rabel kept Smith on the staff. Arthur Smith just kept hanging around no matter what. He was the tight ends coach under Rabel in 2018. He got promoted then to offensive coordinator after Matt LaFleur left to become the Packers head coach. His 1 year at OC was just fantastic. It was the Ryan Tannehill comeback player of the year season. Derrick Henry was dominating, and the Titans had their highest scoring team in 16 years. Tennessee beat the top-seeded Ravens in the playoffs and made the AFC Championship before getting knocked off by the Chiefs. Then in 2020, the Titans won the AFC South for the first time since 2008 after going 11-5, and Derrick Henry won Offensive Player of the Year. That's when finally Arthur Smith got the call to become the head coach of the Falcons. Atlanta was terrible when Arthur Smith got there, but the problem is that they just never improved season to season under him. Arthur Smith inherited a bad team that was headed towards a rebuild. 2021 was the first season without Julio Jones on the roster after he was traded to the Titans in June. That was really just the start of a new Falcons era. It wasn't pretty once Julio was gone. The top wide receiver that season was Russell Gage, who had 770 yards. The Falcons weren't a terrible team, and they finished 7-10, third in the NFC South. The first two games of the Arthur Smith tenure were losses by a combined score of 70-31. Atlanta looked better in the following weeks. They went into their week 6 bye 2-3, and then they won against the Dolphins to sit at 500. They got back to 500 in week 9 before having a losing record for the rest of the season. It got ugly. They had back-to-back bad losses, 43-3 to the Cowboys, 25-0 to the Patriots. Still, it was an improvement from the year prior, and they were 7-8 before they lost their 2 last games of the season. If no Dan Quinn and no Julio Jones really wasn't enough to end the era in Atlanta, the Falcons then traded Matt Ryan to the Colts in March after that season. He finished his last season in Atlanta just shy of 4,000 yards and had 20 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Atlanta decided to draft Desmond Ridder, but to bridge the gap at quarterback, the Falcons signed Marcus Mariota to reunite him with Arthur Smith, who he played for in Tennessee. Tyler Algier broke out on the ground, and Drake London took over as the offense's top target. Mariota started the first 13 games of the following season. He passed for 2,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, and then it was time. The Falcons decided to turn to Desmond Ridder. In 4 games, he had 700 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, the next season, the Falcons started 0-2, but they did recover to sit at 500 as late as week 8, and then Atlanta lost 6 of 7 and went to Ridder during a losing streak. They were 5-10 before winning back-to-back to end the year to finish 7-10 again. Ridder was named the starter heading into 2023. Atlanta did also sign Taylor Heineke to be the backup, who ended up starting in 4 games with 890 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. Meanwhile, Ridder disappointed. He had 2,800 yards, 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. It was another very mid 7-10 season. But for the first time, Arthur Smith had a winning record at some point. The Falcons won 2 straight to start the regular season, and even by the time week 7 had come and gone, they still had a winning record, and then they lost 3 straight to fall to 4-9 going into their week 11 bye. Atlanta won 2 straight out of the break to end up at 500, and then lost 4 or 5 to end the year, including a 48-17 blowout loss to the Saints while still in playoff contention. Of course, that came with Arthur Smith reaming out Dennis Allen after a late fake kneel Jamal Williams touchdown. That was the last time we even saw Arthur Smith on a football field before he was fired by the Falcons. Hindsight's always 2020, but it's clear that Arthur Smith was not the answer in Atlanta. He's gone now, and it's Raheem Morris's time now. But Smith's lasting impact for the Falcons will stay, and his draft selections are going to kill them for the future, and just those players' lack of development and really their usage. Arthur Smith had the 4th overall pick when he first got to Atlanta, and he used it on Kyle Pitts. It's the highest a tight end has ever been drafted. He's been a big topic of discussion when it comes to Arthur Smith. His rookie season was fantastic. Pitts had over 1,000 yards and made the Pro Bowl, but he managed to only score 1 touchdown, and it wasn't on American soil, so it doesn't really count. He wasn't targeted enough in the red zone, and that continued over the years. He had a down 2022 through 10 games. He had 356 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then he suffered a torn MCL. The injury derailed his season, but he was on pace for a very disappointing sophomore year regardless. Fast forward to this past season, and Pitts had a career high in touchdowns, 3. That's all, just 3. In 17 games, he only had 667 yards, less than 100 more than Jonnu Smith, who also scored 3 touchdowns. When you draft a tight end in the first round, especially that high, you have to use him. And Arthur Smith just never really correctly used him, and that was a recurring theme. In the other 2 drafts Smith was running the show, the Falcons had the 8th pick in 2022. They used it on Drake London. He was the first wide receiver off the board before a quick run on wideouts. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams all went soon after. Drake London has been good, even if it hasn't been to the tune of the Ohio State duo of Wilson and Olave, who both have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Drake had 866 yards and 4 touchdowns as a a rookie. He was the Falcons' leading receiver and was again in 2023 with 905 yards and 2 touchdowns. That 2022 draft was very important looking back at it for the Atlanta offense. They took Desmond Ridder in the 3rd round and then selected Tyler Algier in the 5th. He had a great rookie season, rushing for over 1,000 yards and 3 touchdowns. It felt like the Falcons had their next reliable running back, but that really wasn't the case. He did just rush for 646 yards and scored 4 touchdowns last season, but he wasn't the Falcons' lead back. It was Bijan Robinson, who the Falcons took at 8 in 2023. Bijan had a good season with almost 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. There were a lot of high hopes for Bijan as a rookie, and a lot of questions for why you'd take a running back so high in today's NFL. Well, Arthur Smith used him in some weird ways, not having him act as the RB1 until later in the year, and not using him in the red zone situations as often as he should. It didn't make much sense, and Bijan's rookie season alone was really a microcosm of Arthur Smith's time as the Falcons head coach. Arthur Smith was highly sought after and an intriguing head coaching hire leaving Tennessee. He just never used his weapons correctly and couldn't adapt. Whether or not he deserved his roles in the NFL doesn't matter much now. He didn't work out as a head coach, but he has proven to be a great coordinator, and he'll get another chance to do that for the Steelers this season.